Most people wake up every morning, follow routines they didn't consciously design, chase goals they inherited rather than chose, and slowly accept a quiet belief that this is just how life is supposed to be. Not terrible, not extraordinary, just average. Ancient philosophers noticed this pattern thousands of years ago, long before social media, corporate ladders, or modern distractions existed. They observed that the greatest prison humans live in is not made of stone or iron, but of habits, opinions, and unexamined beliefs. One ancient philosophy, in particular, explains with uncomfortable clarity why most people never escape average lives, and why only a few ever do. In ancient Greece, philosophers believed that most human suffering and stagnation came from living unconsciously. They argued that people drift through life asleep, reacting instead of choosing, following instead of thinking. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living, but what he truly meant was even more disturbing. He meant that most people never stop to ask why they think what they think, want what they want, or fear what they fear. As a result, they build their entire existence on borrowed ideas. When your beliefs are borrowed, your life becomes borrowed too. This philosophy taught that average lives are not the result of lack of talent, intelligence, or opportunity. They are the result of never questioning the invisible rules running your behavior. From childhood, people are trained to obey before they are taught to understand. Be quiet. Fit in. Don't ask too many questions. Choose safety over curiosity. Over time, this conditioning becomes internal. Even when no one is watching, people police their own dreams. They reject their own unusual thoughts before the world ever gets a chance to. Ancient philosophers called this condition doxa, or common opinion. Doxa is what everyone knows, what feels normal, what goes unquestioned because it is familiar. According to them, the majority of people live entirely inside doxa. They chase money because society says money equals success. They chase status because status brings approval. They chase comfort because discomfort feels dangerous. Yet none of these pursuits are deeply examined. People simply move in the same direction as the crowd and assume that movement equals progress. This philosophy warned that following the crowd is the fastest way to remain average. When you adopt goals that were designed for everyone, you compete with everyone. When you think the way everyone thinks, you see what everyone sees. And when you live according to shared expectations, you achieve shared results. Average lives are not accidents. They are collective outcomes. The philosophers also spoke about fear, not as a weakness, but as a powerful organizing force. Fear of rejection, fear of being wrong, fear of standing out. So, fear of uncertainty. They noticed that most people do not fail because they lack ability, but because fear quietly sets the boundaries of their ambition. People choose smaller dreams not because they desire less, but because smaller dreams feel safer. Safety, however, comes at a cost: stagnation. According to this ancient philosophy, comfort is one of the greatest enemies of growth. When life becomes predictable, the mind becomes lazy. When routines go unquestioned, the soul slowly dulls. Average lives are built on the worship of comfort. Comfortable jobs, comfortable opinions, comfortable identities. Anything that threatens this comfort is labeled unrealistic, risky, or irresponsible. Over time, the desire for comfort replaces the desire for truth. The Stoics later expanded on this idea by explaining that people mistake external stability for internal peace. They chase predictable incomes, predictable relationships, predictable futures, believing these will protect them from suffering. But the Stoics argued that suffering does not come from uncertainty. It comes from attachment. The more tightly you cling to a fixed version of life, the more fragile you become. Average lives, they said, are lives built on fragile foundations. Another core idea of this philosophy is that identity itself can become a trap. Once people label themselves student, employee, failure, success, introvert, ordinary, they unconsciously defend that identity. They reject opportunities that don't match the story they tell about themselves. They stop experimenting. They stop evolving. The philosopher Epictetus warned that people are disturbed not by events, but by the stories they tell themselves about events. An average life is often nothing more than a story repeated until it feels like destiny. These philosophers believed that most people outsource their thinking. They let parents, teachers, leaders, and trends decide what matters. As a result, they never develop a strong inner compass. When challenges arise, they look outward for permission instead of inward for clarity. This dependence keeps them stuck. Freedom, according to ancient philosophy, begins the moment you take responsibility for your own thinking. Perhaps the most unsettling idea is this: most people don't actually want freedom. Freedom requires effort, risk, and accountability. It requires standing alone at times. Ancient philosophers observed that many people prefer familiar dissatisfaction over unfamiliar possibility. Average lives persist because they are predictable. Predictability feels safe, even when it is quietly painful. Plato illustrated this brilliantly in the allegory of the cave. Prisoners sit chained, watching shadows on a wall, believing the shadows are reality. When one prisoner escapes and sees the real world, he returns to tell the others. Instead of celebrating, they mock him. Some even threaten him. Plato's message was clear. People resist truth when it disrupts their comfort. Escaping average life often means being misunderstood, criticized, or isolated, at least at first. This philosophy does not promise happiness as a constant emotional state. Instead, it promises clarity. Clarity about what you control and what you don't. Clarity about what truly matters. Clarity about your own ignorance. Socrates believed wisdom began with admitting how little you know. This humility opens the door to growth. Arrogance, disguised as certainty, keeps people stuck. Ancient philosophers also emphasize discipline over motivation. Motivation is emotional and unstable. Discipline is philosophical. It comes from values, not feelings. Average lives are often driven by moods, working when inspired, quitting when bored, dreaming when comfortable. Exceptional lives, according to this philosophy, are built through consistent action guided by deeply examined principles. They taught that time is the most misunderstood resource. People assume they have plenty of it. They delay their ambitions, postpone self-examination, and say someday. Seneca warned that life is long only if you know how to use it. Average lives shrink, not because time runs out, but because awareness never begins. This ancient philosophy ultimately delivers a hard truth. No one is coming to save you from mediocrity. No system, no mentor, no opportunity can replace personal responsibility. The moment you realize this is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because you can no longer blame circumstances. Liberating because you no longer need permission. Escaping an average life does not mean becoming famous or rich. Ancient philosophers did not worship wealth. They worshipped excellence of character, clarity of thought, and mastery of self. They believed a truly extraordinary life is one lived deliberately. A life where choices are made consciously, values are chosen intentionally, and fear is acknowledged but not obeyed. Most people never escape average lives because they never pause long enough to ask fundamental questions. Why am I living this way? Whose approval am I chasing? What am I avoiding? What am I capable of if I stop hiding behind comfort? These questions are uncomfortable, which is why they are powerful. This philosophy reminds us that the greatest revolution is internal. When you change how you think, you change what you notice. When you change what you notice, you change what you pursue. And when you change what you pursue, your life inevitably changes direction. The ancient philosophers did not offer shortcuts. They offered responsibility. They did not promise ease. They promised meaning. And they warned that average lives are not forced upon people. They are slowly accepted through silence, fear, and unexamined habits. The moment you begin to question, you step outside the invisible prison. The moment you examine your beliefs, you weaken the chains. And the moment you take ownership of your thinking, you move from living by default to living by design. That, according to ancient philosophy, is the true escape from an average life.